My name is Nadia. I'm 29 years old, and the night my cousin Sasha threw a champagne flute at my head was supposed to be the most important evening of her life. That part, at least, went exactly as planned. What I want to tell you happened across 4 days in October. What I need to tell you first happened across 13 years, because the glass didn't come from nowhere. It came from a very specific place, and understanding that place is the only way any of what followed will make sense. So start there. Start with Sasha. My family on my mother's side is large and loud and organized around a central belief that has never been stated aloud but has governed every gathering, every holiday, every phone call I can remember. That Sasha Mironova is the most important person in any room she enters, and that the rest of us exist to confirm this. Sasha is 2 years older than me. She is beautiful in the obvious way that gets noticed immediately, tall, sharp-featured, the kind of dark hair that behaves. She had been told she was exceptional since she was approximately 4 years old, and she had never, in the 25 years since, had a reason to revise that assessment. She was a buyer for a mid-range fashion label, which she described at every family event as though she were heading acquisitions for a Parisian house. She had opinions about everything. She delivered them without punctuation. I was, in Sasha's taxonomy, background. Not an enemy, not a rival. Those categories would have required her to register me as a threat. I was simply the cousin who was there, who showed up to things, who helped set up and clean up and drive people to the airport and cover the gaps that Sasha left behind her because Sasha was busy, Sasha was running late, Sasha had somewhere more important to be. I am a pediatric occupational therapist. I have worked with children with developmental delays, sensory processing disorders, and post-surgical rehabilitation for 6 years. I make $67,000 a year in a city where that is not a comfortable salary. I work 10-hour days and bring paperwork home and know the names and birthdays of every child on my caseload. I know which kids need weighted blankets and which ones need movement breaks, and which ones will work for exactly 11 minutes before their nervous system calls it quits, and I have learned how to stretch that to 14. I find the work meaningful in a way I could not have anticipated when I chose it, which is the best possible outcome for a career decision made at 22. Sasha had never, in 6 years, asked me what I did at work. She had asked me once, at a Thanksgiving 4 years ago, whether I worked with kids who weren't right, which I absorbed without expression and answered with a brief explanation that she was already looking away from before I finished. My Aunt Vera, Sasha's mother, my mother's sister, was the engine of the family mythology around Sasha. She was a small, precise woman who wore her hair in the same chignon she had worn since 1994 and who organized family events with military specificity and a budget that often required someone else's resources to close. She loved me the way people love a reliable appliance, without passion, with sincere appreciation when I was functional, and with visible irritation when I was not. She called me the practical one at gatherings, usually when introducing me to people who had just asked about Sasha. And this is Nadia, the practical one, said as a compliment, understood by both of us as something else. I had been driving relatives to the airport since I was 19 and had a car. Over 13 years, this had included my grandmother 11 times. She was 81 and lived 40 minutes from the nearest airport and did not trust ride shares, plus assorted aunts, uncles, and second cousins whose visits clustered around holidays. I had never once been reimbursed for gas. When I mentioned this once, carefully, to my mother, she said the family appreciated it even if they didn't say so. I said I understood. Appreciation and acknowledgement are 2 separate currencies, and only one of them is visible. I had covered costs at 6 family events over those 13 years, not large amounts, but present ones. A cake that was more expensive than the budget allowed. A deposit my mother mentioned in passing 3 months after the fact. A florist invoice that came in $340 over the estimate 2 days before a birthday party, and which Vera called me about at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, explaining the situation in the tone of someone who expected the problem to be solved, which it was because I solved it because that was the role. I had done all of this without keeping a ledger, because that was not why I did it. I did it because the family was the family, and showing up was what I knew how to do. What I had not examined closely enough for 13 years was whether showing up was actually working for anyone other than the people I was showing up for. I did not know how to stop. Until October. Rehook, 25% mark. Sasha's engagement party was her third major event in 18 months. The first had been her 30th birthday, a dinner for 40 at a restaurant downtown that Aunt Vera had organized with a deposit I later learned my mother had quietly covered when Vera came up short. Nobody told me this directly. I found out because my mother mentioned it in passing 3 months later, the way she mentioned things she needed to not be a big deal. The deposit was $800. The second had been a girls' trip to celebrate Sasha being promoted at the label, a long weekend at a lake house that I had not been invited to until 48 hours before it happened, when 2 of the original guests canceled, and I received a text from Vera that said, *, we have room now if you want to come. Bring something for the kitchen. *, I went. I brought wine and groceries and cooked dinner both nights and drove 3 people to a vineyard on Saturday because Sasha wanted to drink and not worry about the car. When we got home, Sasha said, loud enough for everyone to hear, that it was nice having someone useful around. I drove 4 hours back on Sunday and sat in my apartment for a long time thinking about the word useful. The engagement party was Sasha's event on a different scale entirely. Her fiancé was a man named Damon who worked in commercial real estate and who seemed, in the 3 times I had met him, pleasant enough in the specific way of men who are not paying close attention. He had proposed in September at a restaurant I had read about in a magazine. Sasha posted 14 photos of the ring in the first 24 hours. Aunt Vera began planning the engagement party immediately. The venue was a private room at a hotel in the city, the same hotel, coincidentally, where I had stayed 2 years earlier for a conference, though nobody knew or would have found this relevant. 63 guests. A cocktail hour followed by a seated dinner. A champagne toast. A slideshow of Sasha and Damon that Vera had commissioned a family friend to produce. I was given 3 jobs. First, pick up the floral arrangements from the florist at noon on Saturday and deliver them to the hotel. Second, coordinate with the catering manager during setup because Vera would be at the salon with Sasha until 3. Third, make sure the AV equipment for the slideshow was tested before guests arrived. I took a half day from work on Friday to confirm details with the hotel. I drove to the florist on Saturday at noon and loaded 8 centerpiece arrangements and 2 statement pieces into my car and delivered them without incident. I coordinated with a catering manager, a patient man named Trevor, who had clearly worked events like this before and who communicated in the calm shorthand of someone who had seen every possible crisis and survived them all. The AV tested fine. The flowers looked good. The room was set. Guests arrived at 6. By 6:30, the cocktail hour was populated with a specific density of a family event where everyone knows each other well enough to be entirely comfortable being unkind. My cousin Britta, Sasha's younger sister, a gentler, quieter version of the same template, found me near the bar and hugged me and said she was glad I was there. We talked for 20 minutes about her new apartment and a book she'd been reading, and it was the best conversation I had at the party. Sasha arrived at 6:45 in a cream-colored dress that justified every compliment it received. She moved through the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been preparing for moments like this since childhood. She hugged the right people for the right durations. She laughed at things strategically. She was, I will grant her, extraordinarily good at events. She reached me somewhere in the middle of the cocktail hour. She looked at my dress, a deep burgundy wrap that I had bought specifically for the evening, and said, "Is that what you decided to wear?"
"It is," I said.
She moved on. I stood with a glass of sparkling water and watched her cross the room toward a cluster of relatives near the windows, and I thought, with a clarity I did not usually allow myself, that I was very tired. Dinner began at 7:30. I was seated at the 4th table from the head, not Siberia but not proximity. My table included 3 second cousins I liked well enough, my mother's friend Helene, and a man named Goran who was apparently Damon's college roommate and who spent most of dinner explaining the commercial real estate market in a way that suggested he had recently been told it was interesting. The toasts began at 8:45. Vera went first, a prepared speech that was polished and emotional and lasted 7 minutes and mentioned Sasha 12 times and Damon 4. Several people at my table made brief eye contact. Damon's father went next, shorter, warmer, funnier, to genuine laughter. A college friend of Sasha's gave a toast that included a story about a trip to Barcelona that I suspect was edited for the family audience. Then Sasha stood. She thanked people in a specific order that communicated a very clear hierarchy. She thanked Damon. She thanked her mother. She thanked her father, who was seated at the end of the head table looking proud and slightly overwhelmed. She thanked the college friend. She thanked Damon's parents. She mentioned Britta. She did not mention me. This was not surprising. It landed nonetheless. She raised her glass. The room raised its glasses. The toast was drunk. And then Sasha, still standing, still holding her champagne flute, turned to look down the room toward my table and said, with 63 people listening, "Oh," and Nadia handled the flowers. "So, if yours is drooping, that's why." Light laughter. The kind that is easy because it costs nothing. I smiled. I held the smile. I put my glass down on the table and placed my hands in my lap. Across the room, I saw Britta look at her plate. I saw my mother hold very still. I saw my Uncle Pavel, Vera's husband, Sasha's father, a big gentle man who had always been kind to me in the uncomplicated way of people who are not paying close enough attention to be unkind. I saw him reach over and refill his wine glass, looking at nothing in particular. And I saw Sasha sit back down, satisfied, already turning to Damon, already done with it.
Dinner continued.
I ate. The food was good. Goran returned to commercial real estate. I listened with enough of my attention to nod at the right intervals and used the rest of it to make a decision that I had been approaching for approximately 13 years and had never quite arrived at until that moment. I was done. Not dramatically, not publicly. Just done. The way a door is done when it closes. Completely, without announcement. Rehook, 50% mark. What happened 20 minutes later I have reconstructed from what I remember and from what I later saw on the recording, which confirmed several things I had not been sure of in the immediate chaos. The tables had been pushed slightly outward from the original layout to create a small central space for the slideshow, which was projected onto a screen at the far end of the room. The slideshow began at 9:15. It was 11 minutes long and contained 47 photos of Sasha and Damon, chronologically organized from their first meeting through the proposal, with a soundtrack that built an emotional intensity toward the final image, which was the restaurant proposal photo in high resolution. During the slideshow, a member of the catering staff came to my table with a question about one of the centerpiece arrangements. There was a small issue with the water reservoir in one of the vessels, and Trevor had quietly flagged me as the person to ask. I stood and followed the staff member to the arrangement in question, which was at the edge of the room near a serving station, and I spent approximately 3 minutes looking at a vase. When I turned back to return to my seat, the slideshow had ended, and the lights had come partially back up. Sasha was standing near the head table receiving congratulations. I began threading back through the room. I do not know what I said or whether I said anything. What I know is that I was passing behind Sasha's chair, 4 feet from the head table, when she turned and saw me and said something. The recording captures her mouth moving, but the ambient sound was too high to catch the words exactly. What the recording does capture, clearly, is what came next. Sasha picked up the champagne flute from the table. She was not reaching for it to drink from it. The angle of her hand, the wrist, the direction, the recording shows this. She threw it. It caught me on the right shoulder and the side of my neck. The flute was crystal, and it did not survive the impact. It shattered on my shoulder, and the largest fragment, approximately 3 inches long with a clean fracture edge, caught the outside of my right ear. I know the fragment caught my ear because I felt the sting immediately, and when I pressed my hand over it, my hand came away with blood on it. Not a lot. A thin, bright line of it across my palm. The table went quiet. Not the whole room. The whole room was not watching yet. But the tables nearest to us went quiet, which created a ripple of silence outward, the way silence travels. I pressed my hand over my ear. "Stop making a scene and sit down," Sasha said. Her voice was low, clipped, the voice she used when she wanted to communicate that something was my fault. She reached for my arm to pull me toward my seat, as if the fastest way to resolve this was to have me be elsewhere. I stepped back. Not dramatically, just out of her reach. I looked at my hand. The blood was real. Thin but real. I need to go to the bathroom, I said. I said it flatly, to no one in particular. I turned and walked to the hallway without looking at the room. In the single-occupancy bathroom off the main corridor, I stood in front of the mirror and examined my ear. The cut was small, a centimeter, maybe slightly more, at the top of the outer ear where the cartilage curves. It had bled the way head cuts do, disproportionately to the actual damage, dramatic in appearance, minor in severity. I ran cold water over it and pressed a wad of paper towel against it and stood there for several minutes, looking at my own reflection. My dress had a small dark stain on the shoulder where the champagne from the flute had hit before it shattered. I thought about the Mont Blanc pen I did not buy for this event. I thought about the florist and the AV equipment and the half day I had taken from work. I thought about the word useful, which Sasha had offered me 2 years ago at the lake house, as though it were something. Then I took out my phone and I did 3 things. The first was practical. I texted my mother, who was still in the dining room, and told her I was fine but leaving, that she should not make a thing of it, and that I would call her tomorrow. She replied within 40 seconds with 3 question marks. I sent back, "Tomorrow." She stopped replying. The second was also practical. I looked up the non-emergency line for the local police precinct and saved the number to my contacts.
I did not call it yet.
I just saved it. I was not sure what I was going to do with it. I was being methodical, the way I was methodical about everything, the way I had learned to be in a family that treated improvisation as a character trait and planning as someone else's job. The third was the one I thought about longest. I opened my phone's contacts and I scrolled to a name I had not called in 8 months. My friend Joel was a personal injury attorney. We had gone to college together, stayed loosely in touch, and had lunch 2 or 3 times a year when our schedules aligned. He was one of those people who was genuinely good at their job and knew it without needing to perform it. I had never called him about anything professional. I had never had reason to. I did not call him yet either. I just looked at his name. Then I dried my hands, pressed my ear one more time with fresh paper towel, threw the stained paper away, and walked back into the hallway. Trevor was standing there. He had not followed me from the room. He had been in the corridor doing something operational, checking the supply list on his tablet, but he saw me come out and he saw the paper towel I was holding to my ear, and his expression shifted into the particular controlled alertness of someone who manages hospitality for a living and has just recognized a situation. "Are you all right?" he said. "A glass broke near me," I said. "I'm okay. Small cut." He looked at the paper towel. He looked at me. "Do you want to file an incident report with the hotel?" I had not thought of this. "Yes," I said. "I think I do." Rehook, 75% mark. I left the party at 9:53. I drove myself to an urgent care clinic 6 blocks from the hotel, not for the ear which had nearly stopped bleeding, but because I wanted the cut documented. I wanted a medical record that said, on this date, at this time, this person presented with a laceration consistent with contact from a sharp object. The attending physician was a tired-looking man named Dr. Wren, who cleaned the cut, confirmed it did not require stitches, applied a butterfly closure, and documented everything in the chart with the patient efficiency of someone who had seen Stranger Things on a Saturday night. He asked how it happened. I told him a glass had broken near me at a party and a fragment caught my ear.
He typed this.
He gave me aftercare instructions and a printout. I sat in my car outside the urgent care at 10:41 and looked at the printout for a moment. Then I called Joel. He picked up, which surprised me. It was late.
He said, "Nadia."
"What's up, you okay?" "I need to ask you something professional."
A pause.
Then, in a different register, "Tell me what happened." I told him. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds, then said, "Do you have any documentation of the incident?" "I have an urgent care record. The hotel is filing an incident report, and there were people there with phones." "Do you know if anyone was recording?" "The slideshow ran just before this happened. A lot of people had their phones out for that." "Okay," he said. "Don't post anything. Don't talk to Sasha or her mother about it. If anyone sends you a message about it tonight, don't respond until we've talked. I'll call you Monday morning." I said okay. I drove home. My phone had 41 messages by Sunday morning. I did not read most of them. I read my mother's, a long one sent at midnight that was part confused, part worried, part defensive of the family in the way she could not help being even when she knew better. I called her Sunday afternoon, and we talked for 38 minutes. She cried twice. I did not cry. I told her what had happened from my perspective, including the ear, including the urgent care visit, including the incident report. She was quiet for a long time after that. She didn't mean to hurt you, my mother said finally. I know, I said. That's not actually the relevant question anymore. The relevant question arrived on Monday, 4 days after the party, in the form of a text from my uncle Pavel. Pavel was not a man who used his phone for anything nuanced. He called people when he needed to talk to them. He texted only to confirm logistics, and he had a 5-year-old smartphone whose screen had a crack across the lower right corner that he had never fixed because it still worked. He was not the person I would have predicted. His text said, *Nadia. I was watching the video I took of the slideshow. Something was in the frame that I don't think was meant to be recorded. Call me when you can, *. I called him immediately. He answered on the first ring. I've been looking at this since last night, he said, without preamble. I didn't know what I was seeing at first. Then I watched it 3 times. He had been recording the slideshow on his phone, the whole 11 minutes of it, from his seat at the second table, angled slightly toward the screen. He had captured the room in the background. And in the final 2 minutes of the slideshow, when the proposal photos were running and the ambient noise was highest, his phone's wide-angle lens had captured, in the background and to the left of frame, the area near the head table. It had captured Sasha picking up the flute. It had captured the throw. You can see her hand, Pavel said. His voice was careful, deliberate, the voice of a man who had spent the weekend deciding something. You can see the angle of it. It's not. It doesn't look like an accident, Nadia. I was sitting at my kitchen table. I had a cup of coffee in front of me that had gone cold. I know, I said. I didn't know it was that bad until I watched the video. A pause. Your ear. She told everyone it was an accident. That you startled her. I know what she told everyone. Silence. I want to bring this somewhere, Pavel said. I'm going to bring this to the police. I wanted to tell you first. I had been waiting for this sentence without knowing I was waiting for it. I felt something settle, not triumph, not relief exactly. More like the feeling of a long-held breath finally released. Okay, I said. Do you want me to? It's your. Yes, I said. I want you to. He went to the precinct that afternoon. He brought his phone and walked them through the clip. 40 seconds of footage, background of a party, a woman in cream picking up a glass and throwing it at her cousin's head. He filed a report. They took his information and the footage and told him someone would follow up. I gave them the urgent care record when they called me the following day. I gave them the hotel's incident report. I gave them Joel, who by that point had already made a separate call to the precinct on my behalf. Sasha was not arrested. I want to be precise about what happened because imprecision would misrepresent it. The police contacted her. There was a conversation. Joel subsequently sent a formal letter outlining a civil claim for the medical expenses, the documented injury, and the pain and suffering provisions available under the circumstances, which he described to me as modest, but entirely supportable. What Sasha received, in total, was a police conversation she had not expected and a legal letter she had not expected, and the knowledge that 40 seconds of footage existed that directly contradicted the story she had told every person at that party. What her mother received was a phone call from Pavel that lasted 22 minutes, and that I know about only because Britta told me later, quietly, that she had heard parts of it through the wall of the house, and that it had been the most direct she had ever heard her father speak to her mother about anything. What the family received, collectively, was information. The footage circulated, not because I shared it, but because Pavel had shown it to his brother, who had mentioned it to Helene, who had texted my mother, which is how these things move in families once they start moving. By Thursday, a week after the party, most of the people who had been in that room had seen the clip. The apology, when it came, was not from Sasha. It was from Damon. He called me on a Friday evening, found my number through Britta, apparently, and said, in a measured and careful way, that he had seen the footage and that he was sorry it had happened and that he had not been watching that part of the room when it occurred and had taken Sasha's version at face value until he saw the video. He said he thought I had handled it with more restraint than most people would have. He said he hoped I was okay. I thanked him. I meant it. He sounded like someone who was doing real accounting. I did not hear from Sasha directly for 6 weeks. When I did, a text, 11 words, *, I hear you went to the police. That was unnecessary, *. I read it once and did not reply. Joel settled the civil matter in December. The amount was not large. It covered the urgent care visit, a follow-up appointment, and a sum for the documented injury that was, as Joel had said, modest. What it was not was nothing. What it was not was stop making a scene and sit down and then everyone moves on, and we do not speak of it again. My Aunt Vera did not speak to me for 4 months. When she did, at a family Christmas that I attended briefly for my mother's sake, she was polite in the precise, glacial way of someone who has decided that politeness is the only form of dignity available to her in a situation she did not control. She did not mention the party. She did not mention the footage. She did not mention the legal letter or the police report or the settlement. She offered me a piece of cake, and I took it, and we stood near the same table for 6 minutes, and everything that had happened in the previous 4 months was present in the silence between us like a third person, and neither of us introduced it. Your mother says you've been busy with work, Vera said finally. I have, I said. Good, she said. And then she turned to speak to someone else. Britta texted me afterward. *, you okay? That looked uncomfortable. *, I said it was fine. She said, she told my dad the whole thing was a misunderstanding. I replied, I know. She sent back a single heart emoji, which from Britta carried more weight than a paragraph from anyone else. Britta and I have lunch now, twice a month, at a Thai place near my apartment that she started coming to after the party. She does not talk about Sasha unless I ask. When I ask, occasionally, out of something that is not quite curiosity and not quite morbidity but lives in the neighborhood of both, she answers honestly and briefly and moves on. She is, I have concluded, the best version of what that family produced, and she has spent her whole life in the shadow of the louder version. I understand that particular address intimately. The engagement, Sasha and Damon, was postponed in January. Not cancelled, postponed. The announcement was vague and attributed to scheduling. I heard this from my mother, who heard it from Vera, who had apparently offered no further explanation. I thought about Damon's phone call, the careful way he had spoken, the real accounting I had heard happening underneath his words. I hoped he had arrived at a clear-eyed view of what he was about to sign up for. I did not say this to anyone. I still work in pediatric OT. I still make $67,000 a year and bring paperwork home and know the names and birthdays of every child on my caseload. One of my kids, a 7-year-old named Marcus who has sensory processing disorder and who spent our first 6 sessions refusing to enter the sensory room, walked in on his own last Tuesday and went straight to the swing without being asked. I sat in the doorway and watched him and did not say anything for a full minute because sometimes the thing a moment needs is to not be interrupted. I do not help set up family events anymore. I do not coordinate with catering managers or test AV equipment or pick up floral arrangements on my half days. I do not cover deposit shortfalls. I do not drive relatives to airports without being asked first, and when I am asked, I consider whether I want to before I answer, which is a liberty I had not previously understood I was allowed to take. This is not a dramatic withdrawal. There was no speech, no confrontation, no moment in a hotel bathroom where I looked in the mirror and announced a new era. I simply became, over the months after October, unavailable for the things I did not want to do. Quietly, consistently, without explanation. The way a door closes, completely and without announcement. The people who noticed said nothing. The 2 people who said something, my mother, twice, and Vera once in a brief and careful phone call, received the same response. I'm not going to do that anymore. And then a subject change that I held firmly. My mother, after the second time, was quiet for a moment and then said, I think I understand. She did not elaborate on what she understood.
I did not ask her to.
Some conversations are complete at that sentence. The cut on my ear healed, in 8 days. There is a small, faint line at the top of the outer cartilage that is only visible in good light if you are looking for it.
Most people would not see it.
It does not hurt. It has not hurt for months. Pavel sees it. He mentioned it once, at a birthday dinner in February, when we were standing near a window catching the afternoon light. He looked at it for a moment, that quiet man, and then he looked at me, and then he looked away and didn't say anything. He picked up his drink and turned to talk to someone else. He is a big, gentle man who had spent 30 years in that family paying close enough attention to notice things that were not meant to be noticed. He just had not, until October, found a reason to say something about what he saw. Sometimes that is the whole story. Someone was watching all along, and they were only waiting for the right 40 seconds to show it. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and circumstances depicted are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only.